8 months ago, I, a 32-year-old woman, stood at the altar, ready to embark on a new chapter of my life. My wedding day was supposed to be a joyous celebration, a moment of love and unity. But as I looked out at the sea of familiar faces, two glaring absences shattered the illusion of perfection. My parents and my younger sister, Mullen, were nowhere to be seen. Their decision to skip my wedding wasn't just a minor oversight. It was a calculated move, a silent protest against the audacity of my happiness. You see, I had committed the ultimate sin in their eyes. I had married before Mullen, the golden child, the embodiment of their perfect family image. The tension had been brewing for years, but their absence that day was the final devastating blow. My parents, who had always prioritized Mullen's achievements over mine, couldn't bear the thought of their less successful daughter stepping into the spotlight first. It wasn't just about missing a wedding, it was about their carefully constructed facade crumbling. Mullen, the prodigy who had effortlessly excelled in every aspect of life, from academics to modeling, was supposed to be the first to marry. The first to give them the grand, envy-inducing wedding they had always dreamed of. But I disrupted their plans, and in their eyes, that was unforgivable. The days leading up to the wedding were filled with passive-aggressive comments and outright dismissals. My mother, ever the critic, had scoffed at my choice of dress, calling it practical but hardly worthy of praise. My father, silent and distant, barely acknowledged my engagement. And Mullen? She didn't even bother to RSVP. The absence of my family on what should have been the happiest day of my life was a wound that cut deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't just their absence, it was the message it sent. I would never be enough. Not for them, not for their perfect family narrative. And as I stood there, surrounded by love, but feeling utterly alone, I realized that their absence wasn't just a rejection, it was a declaration of war. Growing up, my family was a stage, and Mullen was the star of every performance. From the moment she could walk, she was the center of attention, the golden child who could do no wrong. She was the valedictorian, the prom queen, the model everything my parents could ever dream of. Her achievements were celebrated with lavish parties, framed photos, and endless praise. I, on the other hand, was the understudy, always in the shadows, never quite measuring up. My accomplishments, like earning a degree in computer science, were met with a half-hearted, well done, before the conversation inevitably shifted back to Mullen's latest triumph. It wasn't just about her success. It was about the way my parents doted on her, as if she were the only child who mattered. The comparisons were relentless. Mullen was tall, slender, and effortlessly beautiful, while I was constantly reminded of my shortcomings. My mother's cruel remarks about my weight and appearance were a constant soundtrack to my childhood. She signed me up for workout classes I didn't want to attend and put me on diets I didn't need, all while praising Mullen for her natural beauty. "If you just put in a little more effort," she would say, "you could look as nice as your sister." But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. Mullen's shadow loomed large, and I was always the second best, the afterthought. By the time I reached my mid-20s, I was exhausted. I had spent years trying to win my parents' approval, joining clubs they suggested, taking classes they recommended, even dabbling in modeling for a brief, disastrous period. But nothing I did could ever compete with Mullen's perfection. The final straw came when I realized that my parents' love was conditional, reserved only for those who fit their ideal image. I gave up trying to impress them and decided to focus on building my own life. I found solace in my career as a software developer and in the relationships I formed with people who valued me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. But even as I distanced myself from my family, the scars remained. Every family gathering was a painful reminder of where I stood in their eyes. I would nod and smile as they gushed over Mullen's latest promotion or vacation, all while feeling like an outsider in my own family. It wasn't until I met my husband that I truly began to heal. He saw me for who I was, flaws and all, and loved me unconditionally. For the first time, I felt seen, valued, and enough. But even as I built a life of my own, the weight of my family's expectations and their disappointment lingered, a constant reminder of the love I had never been able to earn. When I announced my engagement, I naively hoped it would be a turning point in my relationship with my parents. After years of feeling like the invisible daughter, I thought my wedding might finally be an occasion where they would show some pride in me. But their reaction was anything but celebratory. Instead of congratulations, there was silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that spoke volumes. My mother's first words were not of joy, but of doubt. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked, her tone laced with skepticism. She even suggested I improve my physical condition before the big day, as if my wedding were a performance to be perfected rather than a celebration of love. My father, ever the passive observer, said nothing at all. It was as if my happiness was an inconvenience, a disruption to their carefully curated narrative. The lack of enthusiasm extended to the wedding planning. While my mother had spent years meticulously crafting Pinterest boards for Mullen's hypothetical wedding, she showed no interest in helping me. When I chose my dress, a simple yet elegant aligned gown that made me feel beautiful, her only comment was that it was practical and suitable for my figure. It was a backhanded compliment, one that stung more than any outright criticism. Left to navigate the preparations alone, I found an unexpected ally in my future mother-in-law, who treated me with the warmth and support I had always craved from my own family. Together, we tackled everything from seating arrangements to floral designs, but her kindness only highlighted the void left by my parents' absence. The final blow came when my parents failed to RSVP. I had sent both electronic and paper invitations, meticulously double-checking the addresses to ensure they received them. Yet when I followed up, my calls and messages were met with evasion. "We're busy," they said. "We'll check our schedules." But deep down, I knew the truth. They had no intention of coming. Their absence on my wedding day was a gaping wound, a physical ache that no amount of joy could fully mask. As I walked down the aisle, I couldn't help but notice the empty seats in the front row, a glaring reminder of their rejection. The father-daughter dance I had dreamed of since childhood was replaced by an awkward silence, a moment that should have been filled with love, but was instead steeped in sorrow. After the wedding, their excuses only grew more absurd. When I finally confronted them, they claimed they had never received the invitations, accusing me of deliberately excluding them. It was a blatant lie, one that I could easily disprove with delivery confirmations and email receipts. But instead of apologizing, they doubled down, painting themselves as the victims of my supposed carelessness. Their gaslighting was a final twist of the knife, a cruel reminder that even on what should have been the happiest day of my life, they couldn't put aside their pride and support me. Their absence wasn't just a rejection, it was a declaration that I would never be enough, not even on my own wedding day. Just months after my wedding, the family dynamics took another dramatic turn when Mullen announced her engagement. The contrast between her experience and mine couldn't have been more stark. While my wedding had been met with indifference and outright neglect, Mullen's engagement was celebrated with the kind of fanfare I had only ever dreamed of. My parents, who had barely acknowledged my marriage, were now in full wedding planning mode, their excitement palpable. They boasted about securing upscale venues, designer gowns, and exclusive vendors, as if Mullen's wedding were a royal affair. My mother even took her to private fittings at luxury boutiques, something she had never offered to do for me. It was a painful reminder of the double standards that had defined our relationship for as long as I could remember. But the real twist came when our extended family began to take notice of the blatant favoritism. Word of my parents' absence at my wedding had spread, and it didn't sit well with many relatives. One by one, family members started to distance themselves from Mullen's wedding plans. Some cited scheduling conflicts, while others were more direct, expressing their disapproval of how I had been treated. Even my father's brother, who had always stayed silent to keep the peace, reached out to apologize for not speaking up sooner. He and his family decided to boycott Mullen's wedding altogether, a move that sent shockwaves through the family. Desperate to salvage their reputation, my parents launched a campaign to rewrite the narrative. They began calling relatives, accusing me of spreading vile tales out of jealousy. They claimed I had deliberately excluded them from my wedding to play the victim, even going so far as to say I had sent their invitations to outdated addresses, a laughable excuse. given that they had lived in the same house for decades. But their attempts to gaslight the family backfired spectacularly. The more they tried to paint me as the villain, the more their own flaws were exposed. Relatives began sharing their own stories of my parents' favoritism, from childhood birthday parties where Mullen's gifts overshadowed mine to family gatherings where my achievements were brushed aside. The truth was out, and no amount of spin could change it. The breaking point came at a family gathering where my mother, in a fit of defensiveness, lashed out at anyone who dared to mention my wedding. Her outburst only confirmed what everyone already knew, that their perfect family image was a facade, built on years of emotional manipulation and inequality. The fallout was swift and decisive. Key family members withdrew their support for Mullen's wedding, and even the luxury venue they'd booked through family connections suddenly became unavailable. The irony was almost poetic. Their obsession with maintaining appearances had become their undoing. As the drama unfolded, I found myself feeling an unexpected sense of relief. For the first time, I wasn't the one trying to prove my worth or defend my choices. The truth had done the work for me, exposing the cracks in my parents' carefully constructed narrative. And while their attempts to blame me for their downfall were hurtful, they were also a reminder of how far I had come. I no longer needed their approval or their love. I had built a life of my own, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. The final breaking point came when I decided to confront my parents face to face. After years of biting my tongue and swallowing my pain, I could no longer stay silent. Their absence at my wedding, their blatant favoritism toward Mullen, and their relentless attempts to rewrite the narrative had pushed me to my limit. I needed them to hear me, to truly understand the weight of their actions, even if it meant risking the fragile remnants of our relationship. The conversation started with their usual deflection. They accused me of being jealous of Mullen, of trying to sabotage her wedding out of spite. But this time, I didn't back down. I looked them in the eye and said, "You're right. I am jealous not of Mullen's career, her looks, or her success. I'm jealous of the love and support you've always given her, the kind you never even tried to give me." The room fell silent, but I wasn't done. I recounted every moment that had shaped my childhood. The birthdays overshadowed by Mullen's achievements, the canceled graduation dinner because of her modeling callback, the years of being told I wasn't good enough. I even brought up the wedding planning, how they had spent years dreaming of Mullen's big day while dismissing mine as an afterthought. My father tried to interrupt, accusing me of exaggerating, but I didn't let him. "You don't get to silence me anymore," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I've spent my entire life trying to earn your approval, and it was never enough. Do you know how it feels to watch your parents plan a wedding for a daughter who isn't even engaged while ignoring the one who is standing right in front of them?" Their response was as predictable as it was devastating. Instead of acknowledging their role in my pain, they turned the blame back on me. "Why didn't you speak up sooner if you felt this way?" my mother demanded, as if my years of silent suffering were my own fault. My father went further, accusing me of being spiteful for sharing my feelings with the family. But the most cutting remark came from my mother. "We always knew you were insecure about Mullen's success," she said coldly. "But we never thought you'd go this far to ruin her wedding." In that moment, something inside me shattered, not from sadness, but from clarity. I realized that no matter what I said or did, they would never see me as anything more than the jealous, insecure daughter. They were so consumed by their perfect family image that they couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge the damage they had caused. I stood up, my heart heavy but my resolve unshaken. "You're right about one thing," I said before leaving. "You did raise me. You taught me that I would never measure up, that Mullen's achievements would always matter more than mine. But you also taught me that I deserved better than this, even if that wasn't your intention." As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time, I had said everything I needed to say without apology or regret. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need them at all. And while the pain of their rejection would always linger, I knew I had finally broken free from the cycle of seeking their love. It wasn't the happy ending I had hoped for, but it was the one I needed. Just When I thought the drama couldn't escalate further, Mullen decided to take matters into her own hands. Unable to reach me directly, I blocked her number after her condescending text. She turned her attention to my husband. It was a calculated move, one that reeked of desperation and manipulation. She found his number through a mutual acquaintance and sent him a series of messages, each more patronizing than the last. Her initial text was deceptively polite, framed as concern for our family's well-being. But it didn't take long for her true intentions to surface. She accused me of being insecure and jealous, claiming that my actions were an attempt to ruin her wedding. "Family dynamics are complex," she wrote, as if my husband, a successful software architect with an MBA, needed a lesson in interpersonal relationships. She even had the audacity to suggest that he should help me behave in a more suitable manner, as if I were a child in need of correction. The messages grew increasingly condescending, with Mullen implying that her success and social standing made her the authority on how our family should function. But the real kicker came when she tried to appeal to his ambition. "Surely you understand that maintaining good relationships with successful family members like myself could be beneficial for your future," she wrote, as if her corporate rank and networking opportunities would somehow impress him. It was a laughable attempt at manipulation, one that revealed just how little she understood about the man I had married. My husband, who had always seen through Mullen's facade, found her messages more amusing than threatening. "She really doesn't know me at all, does she?" he said, shaking his head in disbelief. When I returned home that evening, we sat together and read through the messages, laughing at Mullen's blatant attempts to control the narrative. Her tactics were nothing new. She had always tried to turn people against me when direct confrontation failed. In high school, it was my friends. Now it was my husband. But this time, her plan backfired spectacularly. Instead of driving a wedge between us, her messages only brought us closer. We joked about her arrogance and made plans for a weekend getaway, refusing to let her drama overshadow our happiness. My husband's response to her was perfect. Instead of engaging in her manipulative games, he simply wrote, "Thank you for your concern about Rebecca's well-being." As her husband, I focused on supporting her happiness, not managing her behavior. "I think it's best if you direct any future concerns to Rebecca directly. Have a nice day." It was a polite but firm dismissal, one that left Mullen fuming. She sent one final message, accusing him of being poisoned against the family, but it was clear she had lost this battle. The irony was almost poetic. Mullen's attempt to manipulate my husband had only strengthened our bond, proving once and for all that her tactics no longer had power over me. For the first time, I felt truly free from her influence, no longer weighed down by the need to compete or prove myself. Her failure was a turning point, a reminder that I'd built a life with someone who truly saw and valued me, and that was something Mullen could never take away. In the aftermath of the confrontation with my parents and Mullen's failed attempt to manipulate my husband, I finally felt a sense of closure I have been searching for my entire life. For years, I had carried the weight of their expectations, their comparisons, and their rejection, but now that burden was gone. The relief was palpable, like a heavy chain had been unlocked and cast aside. I no longer felt the need to prove myself to them or seek their approval. The young girl who had once desperately craved their love and validation was gone, replaced by a woman who had found her worth elsewhere in the life I had built with my husband and the people who truly cared about me. The truth about how my parents had treated me had finally come to light, and the ripple effects were undeniable. Family members who had once turned a blind eye to their favoritism began to speak up, sharing their own observations and experiences. The more my parents tried to defend themselves, the more their carefully constructed facade crumbled. Key relatives, including my father's brother, decided to boycott Mullen's wedding, a move that sent a clear message: their actions had consequences. Even the luxury venue they had secured through family connections suddenly became unavailable, a symbolic blow to their perfect family image. It was as if the universe itself was holding them accountable for years of emotional manipulation and inequality. But the most surprising outcome was the sense of peace I felt. For the first time, I wasn't the one fighting to be seen or heard. The truth had done the work for me, exposing the cracks in their narrative and forcing them to confront the damage they had caused. While they continued to blame me for their tarnished reputation, I no longer felt the need to defend myself. I had said everything I needed to say, and their refusal to take responsibility only confirmed what I had always known. They would never change. With that realization came freedom. I turned my focus to the life I had built with my husband, a life filled with love, respect, and mutual support. We laughed together, planned for the future, and celebrated the small joys that had once been overshadowed by family drama. My husband's unwavering support was a constant reminder that I didn't need my parents' approval to be happy. I had found my own version of success, one that wasn't defined by their expectations or Mullen's achievements, but by my own sense of fulfillment. The final lesson was perhaps the most profound. True success isn't about impressing others or meeting their standards. It's about living authentically, surrounded by people who love and accept you for who you are. For years, I had tried to fit into a mold that was never meant for me, but now I was free to be myself. The weight of their expectations was gone, replaced by a lightness I hadn't felt in decades. As I stood on the other side of this journey, I realized that the greatest victory wasn't in proving them wrong or winning their approval. It was in finding my own happiness on my own terms. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly free.